Yes, you did butcher our names and the company names. You kind of combined a role and a name of a company, but that's okay because it is the last panel. And look, when I talked to Doug about this panel, I was like, can we actually push the audience to do this? Because this is not a typical topic that most people address, which is a really sexy topic of insurance, actuary science, and combine it with a topic that everyone wants to talk about right now, which is AI agent, the building out your own personal agent. Well, that's fun. And so when I thought about, I was just in Bermuda at this incredible conference with Saeed, and I met the folks from Rel Insurance, Joe and Steve, that were on the Scott. And when he told me, he was like, reinsure products in a Web3 space that no one is willing to do and has not insured yet. And then that's when I realized, I was like, in order for us to create the trust layer of the future of this AI ecosystem, we're going to have to think about insurance. So my name is Joshi. I'm the CEO of the Decentralized AI Society. And we are as an industry association, we're identifying the leading players that are building out the future of the AI ecosystem. And we're gathering them together and uniting them to figure out how do we actually build trustworthy AI, and how do we push decentralized AI and move them closer into the enterprise stack. And so here we are with one of our members of Shiza. We have Saeed from Shiza. And when I met Joe, who was the founder of Realm, he told me that Christian is going to be here. So I was like, we have to have this conversation. And so I want to set it up that, usually when we think about the tech stack, there's all these different ways to compare the centralized tech stack, centralized AI tech stack, and the decentralized. But I want to, just simplify it and to think about, this whole future. We can think about there's a hardware layer, there's a social and a software layer, and then there's the socialware layer. And all of these layers, we have to start thinking about, will this hardware act upon me, or will I have control of this layer of the hardware? The same thing for the software. Will the software act upon me, or will I be able to control how the software represents me? And then we have to think about the socialware part. I think we're going to solve the tech part much more easily with the socialware part, which is making AI trustworthy and it's the governance stuff. It's the policy. It's the trust. It's the insurance. It's all the risk, right? How do we deal with all the stuff to make it super easy for mass participation to happen? And I think this is the conversation we need to have right here. So I'm so excited to have you two here. Christian, can you introduce, first, let's just do a quick round of introductions. And I really want to get into the meaty conversation. And I wanted to kind of just talk to each other. It's the last panel of the day. And let's just jump in. So yes, Christian, what does Realm Insurance do?
What do we do? So, insurance is possibly one of the most boring things in the earth. But Realm is kind of trying to make it a little bit sexy. We have been around for 6 years and we have over 2,500 clients around the world. 60 of those are AI companies that buy insurances from us.
And how many are in the decentralized AI space?
0. Not one. And
I want to come back in a year to have this conversation and see what that number is.
Yeah, absolutely. So we provide dedicated and informed capacity to emerging technologies around the world. It started off 6 years ago after we saw a huge amount of venture money being pumped into crypto companies. Any self-respecting independent non-executive director needs this thing called D&O insurance if you're going to take that risk. 6 years later, after seeing 10,000 companies in over 36 different jurisdictions, we insure 2,500 of them. Web3 companies, cannabis companies, alternative therapeutics. That's like psilocybin research for PTSD for veterans, AI companies, adult entertainment as well, gaming, esports. So we do a lot of things that classically people don't want to do. AI is a massive focus part for us. We've launched 3 new AI insurance products, or insurance for AI associated risks. Headquartered in Bermuda, we're regulated in 6 other different jurisdictions as well.
What is this?
So we're probably involved in, since we're talking about boring things, we're probably involved in 2 of the most boring things that no one has, I'm sure, especially in this crowd, has heard of: artificial intelligence and Web3, crypto. What we're focusing on is we're already assuming it's a given for us that AI agents and agentic solutions are going to end up becoming a reality. So if that's the case, our entire thesis is based on what does a post-agentic world look like? And for that, what we're looking at is this mass proliferation of agentic solutions coming into the market, leading to the automation of tasks, which will then lead to the automation of processes, ultimately leading to the automation of jobs. So when we talk about a paradigm shift that's going to happen, unlike anything humanity has ever experienced, because throughout the course of human civilization, we have been a very labor-driven economy. Whether it's manual labor, or whether it's intellectual labor, or whether it's creative labor, labor nevertheless. What we're saying is that we have to shift away from thinking about being labor-driven and start focusing on what we call intellect-driven. And that is where these AI agents start to come into play, and the ownership of these AI agents, and I'm going to use your favorite term here, Trisha, decentralization. This is where decentralized AI really starts to come into play. Of course,
does it look like
so
for your product?
So today, every single inference call that someone makes with an agent, what they're doing is they're actually giving up their information, right? Their most intimate details to these centralized organizations like an OpenAI, like a Google, like an Anthropic. What we're saying is that instead of giving this information to a large language model, we're introducing this concept of an individualized language model, or an ILM. That ILM is novelly yours. No one else has access to it. It's cryptographically secured, encrypted, and if someone wants access to it, they need permission to access to be able to do so. So that's how you encapsulate the ownership of AI. So what we say at Shiza is own your AI before AI owns you.
Right. So you're enabling on the software level. That's very clear for the software, for you to be able to own the software. Software is an asset. So what do we, what I want to talk about is really getting to risk. He's like, what I saw when you gave me the demo for Shiza, it made it clear was an interface. It makes it so easy for anyone to create their own helm, right? So UX wise, you could enable mass participation. But we were talking before, is that mass participation also means mass risks. So what are the risks that could come with anyone and, have their own agent? You're talking about everyone can be intelligent, but if you're pulling on your own data and that data, your own data is not necessarily intelligent, it may be very wrought with issues. Like what's going to happen, have agents representing us extensions of ourselves, kind of doing their own thing and creating more risk. Like what are these problems? If we could just talk through between us, what do we see happening?
So on that note, one thing that I want to emphasize to people is that the term intelligence, right? We have to realize that intelligence itself comes with its own set of risks, right? The smarter someone is, the more creative they are. They're going to do novel things. And with every novel thing that you're trying to do things that have never been done before, which means that it's going to pave the way for others to try to do the very same things in a wide variety of ways. When you do that, that's ultimately what creates the risk. Now, the problem is you can't anticipate a risk until and unless after it actually happens. There's people a lot smarter than we are who are in the business of managing risk. This is where Realm comes into the place. We are in the business of creating and building out the infrastructure and essentially creating that risk. So some of those risks could be things like data privacy, for example. So we were the Steve Bannon example was a great example, right? We were talking about that earlier, which is he used an LLM for a particular use case, but the problem was what the output of that LLM.
I did false cases that didn't exist. Right?
Yeah, that was a bit of a mess up. But the fact of the matter is, we're talking about agents. I didn't even think of something that you mentioned upstairs as people build more and more agents and they start to be able to transact the more and more kind of tasks. Then you start to get into the world of the Sybil attack. I'm not going to lie, I'm going to be pretty miffed if an agent starts, putting Sybil attacks on the Ethereum network, because probably as an insurer, we might not have overly considered that, agentic AI is going to start being able to be manipulated to, take down blockchain networks, which inherently are secure by the nature of what their technology is. So I will be sending a message to our actuaries later just to make sure that they figure that one out. But on the Bannon front, this is something that is going to happen in everyday life. You say that people are forging their way through as a super intelligent, creating new products, ultimately creating new risks. With every new product, there is also someone who's going to use that product for good and that product for bad.
Yeah, I feel because like some people, let's say you already are, it's an extension of yourself, but if someone already is prone to lying, right? And they create an agent to reflect themselves and you're bringing in data from your like WhatsApp and like your Google documents and your text messages. And that's a reflection extension of my personhood. But how is this going to work? That they're building it on Shiza. Is this, how would you ensure that? How do you anticipate that?
Well, we would basically have to, would have a very, very long conversation and figure out what guardrails you're putting around this, right? Where is that identity level?
Yeah, I was going to say, have this conversation now. I'm on you. What would you ask?
I mean, God, there'd be 1,000 different things, but if someone is building an agent, you'd almost go down that whole KYC AML route. Is there some kind of identifier to someone who is building out that agent? Or is it completely anonymous? It's like the person who's not afraid to, if it's their own data, the individual language model, if they're the one controlling, then how should they be upset, or should they be upset if they're having to identify themselves to be able to use their personal agent? If you're just making it fully anonymous, and then you do have that impact of, using good things for bad, that's not good risk management.
So we've thought one aspect that we've been putting a lot of thought behind is, again, when we start thinking about what does a post-agentic world look like, one of the things that we also have to think about, and this is crucial, one thing that we have as humans is this thing called accountability. It's very easy for hold human beings accountable. Today, there's about 9 billion humans, or 7 billion humans.
Always.
But at least I was outlined. Well, at least we have systems in place that will try to do it, right? And yes, we can have philosophical conversations around does the system always work, but at least there's a framework in place, right? Problem is with AI, we don't have a framework in place, and the reason why we don't have a framework in place is because the technology is just not mature enough. Those are the things we need to start thinking about. So from our perspective, some of the guardrails that we're thinking about is this thing called proof of intellect, right? So a proof of intellect essentially is for your ilm. Imagine a world. Today we've got 7 billion people on the planet. Now, let's say that for every individual, if they have their own agents that are a derivative of their own ilm, we're going to have trillions of agents running around. How do you associate? And if they're anonymized, right? If they're anonymized, then the question is, and if they say something, how do you go about doing that? Now, does that mean that you're not going to have a world in which there's not going to be anonymous agents? No, but what you could do is you create weighting mechanisms so that when people are learning from those intellects, you're getting certain weightings, and if you're anonymized, then you get lesser of a weighting. But if you have gone through some sort of a KYC process, you get a higher weighting. So that's how you start associating that proof of intellect to say this intellect, this agent is sourcing from these intellects are coming from these individuals, sort of like a blue check, the blue check mark on Twitter, right? This verification process, and that is something that could be algorithmically solved for, and those are some of the things that we're thinking about. That's what we call our proof of intellect.
And I guess that's, ultimately where you look at risk management. But insurance works different ways, and then lots of different types of insurance products. One of the big ones is directors and officers. That is something that you buy as a director.
I didn't hear you say
directors and officers. So, basically you buy that if you're a founder, and in case your either investors want to sue you, or your equity holders want to sue you, or shareholders or anything else want to sue you because you've misrepresented something, or it protects you. It protects you for all your legal costs.
But how would it work for Shiz? Like, what's the responsibility level? Well,
this is exactly the point. What is the responsibility level? And that is determined by the industry. That's determined by regulators. That's determined by, the world. What is your responsibility? And that's exactly that uncertainty which these kind of insurance coverages kind of cover. And that's specifically for you rather than Shiza itself. There are then other products which would kind of back Shiza's liability. So if you're creating, everything's under contract, right? In the corporate world, everything is done for usually a monetary exchange, and it is done under contract. 90% of those contracts have some kind of liability, part of it. Regulators mandate insurances as part of different regulatory processes. And there are products like ones we built, which specifically cover AI companies for any liability that arises out of their products. So generative AI, right? You're using generative AI, and it's the age-old copyright discussion that everyone's having where, it uses X and it looks like an upside-down tick that's white and it's got a black background, and you launch that as your new product logo. Well, pretty sure Nike's going to have a problem with that. So we cover the AI company when they have produced that image. As a result, their client is sued, because their client would then sue the AI company for making that image. LLMs as well, scraping data from multitude of different companies around the world. Great example of the New York Times. New York Times is like, that's my data. You didn't pay for it.
So in this case, would you cover Shiza, and then would individuals like me building my LM punches also go to you first? The product, how would it work?
No, not necessarily. So we would cover Shiza, right? And also depends on how the contracts work. You would use Shiza to create something, and as long as the understanding and it's under contract that this is what Shiza should be delivering when you use it, that's exactly what we would cover them for. If it didn't, and then anyone wanted to sue Shiza, they would then be covered for that.
And don't forget that Shiza will also be covering ourselves with our terms of agreements that we have with our users.
Agreed, but we also, we're in Canada right now, but we know in the US, contract doesn't mean shit. Like, it might say X, but you're going to sue absolutely everyone, and your mother and your auntie and your uncle and any single person. Yeah, way more. And also Australia, the second most litigious country in the world. Like, it doesn't, a contract means X. The outcome of the monetary, if there is a monetary kind of injury, that is what someone's going to come after. And they're going to come after any possible way they possibly can.
So are you prepared for a world of agentic world where all sorts of stuff? And you could have liars on there. You could have scammers using Shiza's platform, but you have to explore this option.
So not only are we prepared for it, we're anticipating it. That is, as long as you're dealing with unless we want to stop dealing with human beings, right? This whole notion around trying to build this perfect utopian world, it does not exist. As long as you have human beings, you're going to have scammers. As long as you have human beings, you're going to have liars. As long as you have human beings, you're going to have assholes. And that is ultimately what is going to lead to innovation, right? That is how that is the risk of innovation. Our job is not to ensure, okay, well, let's create the perfect society that we're fully expecting people to break shit, right? That is our expectation. I don't even use the word disruption. I mentioned this when we were over at Bermuda. I don't use the word disruption, right? I think it's too soft of a term. What we're doing is not disruption. What we're doing is destruction. But remember, destruction is also the catalyst for a creation. That's the cost of innovation.
So, this is interesting that we're prepared for this world, because we were just talking to Kevin, who represents Morpheus. And can you just, I want you to come up. I don't have a mic for you, but are we allowed to take questions from the audience, or can Kevin just come on real quick? I just want to share this fascinating discussion.
Thanks for letting me in.
Just come on up. And we had this fascinating discussion with, you can sit here. And we had this fascinating discussion. Whoa, what went on here?
You have to walk away from mics.
All right. So we had this, if you all do, who knows what Morpheus is? It's a platform. So why don't we give a quick description of what Morpheus is, as if, really it's the platform for building decentralized AI. But we had this amazing discussion where you were like, we also need insurance. Can you give us a context of how it emerged?
Morpheus is a peer-to-peer network that will enable sovereign intelligence. So multi-agent framework on top of a distributed compute network. And the community of Morpheus wants everyone to be able to have sovereignty over their intelligence, and is building a lot of the core open source technology to enable that.
And Shiza's building on top of Morpheus.
Yes, Shiza is one of the subnets building on top of Morpheus, offering an agent forge. We're very excited about that.
And also you're a member of Deus.
and we are one of the founding members.
Yes, so many founding members along with Shiza. So what was a discussion that you had where when you saw Christian, you're like, you have insurance, you provide products to the Web3 space, you're like, I need to talk to you. Like, what was that? Can you catch the audience up with this like really incredible interaction? I felt like I witnessed a moment where it's like, this is going to be an incredible moment a year later when we talk about a world of agents. Like, this is going to become a case study that we cite.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of contributors in the Morpheus ecosystem that I think have consistently been thinking ahead about what's next. The Morpheus white paper came out when nobody was talking about agents, but agents are at the core of the white paper. I think Morpheus, as a community, is always thinking ahead. And now I do think that there is this interesting, when we think about the adoption of open source agentic systems, having the insurance equation solved is, I think, very important. We want these systems to be open, but we want them to be safe, and we want them to be aligned to the user. And I think there are a lot of community members in Morpheus who think that the ability to insure agents is a great way to just unlock their growth, because ultimately AI needs to serve the end user, and you can better serve the end user as an agent builder by solving that part of the equation.
What goes through your head here with this? Because you have not insured anyone in the centralized AI space. So I'm curious, what is this next conversation? Can you give us a preview of what that conversation is going to look like?
Again, it's really boring, but the foundation. No. The reason that there's two things I say. The foundation of any company or any entity to be able to make money or progress kind of results in really two things, or maybe three things. It's a way to be paid or store money, right? Let's talk about a bank, or if it could be a crypto rail. You might have regulation or be regulated by a regulator. And the other one, transparently, is insurance. Now, pretty much majority of companies around the world that are, Fortune 500 companies all have insurances, but tens of 20, 30 different types of it. As all these technologies evolve and adapt, every single technology and ever used all has wild amounts of insurances. Because what ultimately happens is people like to point a finger at someone when something goes wrong.
But there's no one to point a finger at Morpheus, like, for example, where there's no point.
Right. So Morpheus is a completely open source code base. However, those who build on top of it will be entities like Shiza that have that are building new technologies. Quick story that David shared with me, David Johnson, a Morpheus contributor. Airbnb hit a wall in the early days of its development. And Airbnb is a peer-to-peer network, right? You have hosts and guests participating in a peer-to-peer network. There was a fundamental problem with their business. Hosts didn't want to host guests because they were afraid that they were going to break and steal their things. How did Airbnb get past this critical hurdle? They had to actually self-insure their business. They first tried to go get traditional insurance. Everyone said, no, this is crazy. You guys have this ridiculous peer-to-peer model. We don't want to touch it. But they went to some of their investors, and they were able to raise an amount of money that was put into escrow, and that was enabling them to self-insure. They used that to offer insurance to their hosts. Once hosts knew that they had insurance, it completely unlocked their business model. And that was a watershed moment for the growth of Airbnb. I think that, it's happy that David shared that story with me. I thought it was very insightful. And I think that the open peer-to-peer network of agents will be accelerated by this type of product.
And we already have the payment rail structures in place that we don't need to adjust. We can much more easily, create, an escrow blockchain rails with all the rails that it's in a void. It's actually very quick.
Yeah, it's always difficult to know where you are on the time curve of adoption. I think we're very, very early, and insurance markets typically form sometimes in the early stages, which is great. Was great to learn from the Realm Insurance team. But they really start to mature with more adoption, more liability, more data, more understanding of the actuarial math, and it's hard to tell where we are with that.
I think,
One last comment, Joe, then we're going to wrap up.
like, ultimately, people have to remember that insurance is a 350-year-old industry that resulted in two dudes gambling as to whether or not a ship was going to come back across the Atlantic. Like, insurance is just
Just a slaves, right?
yeah,
Slavery
yeah.
with risks.
Insurance is just highly educated gambling. That's what it is. The fact of the matter is we're just far more comfortable with taking far more gambles in what ultimately people would see as considerably riskier businesses. There is absolutely no reason why we couldn't start to look to explore. Like we insure associations, for example. There's no reason why you couldn't try and attribute that to something that is completely open source to put some validity to an underlying ecosystem or decentralized AI, decentralized agentic platform, but then other people build on. Because realistically, if Morpheus completely goes to pot, Shiz is probably going to turn around and go, my entire business model's gone. Now what happens? Who do I sue? Who do I look at? If Morpheus is then looking at how do we secure that underlying, how do we, provide security to the people building on it, it's a whole other conversation. That's where you start to unlock that growth, which is the prime example of like Airbnb. Same as Uber. If you want to look, Uber recently became profitable for like the first time in however long it's been in existence. Really dig down into why Uber became profitable. I'll give you a little cheat here. They were spending $70 million a year on insurance for their cars. So, yeah.
Well, I think this was a really groundbreaking panel. In a year, quick round, yes or no, are we going to see the first insured, decentralized AI agents?
I hope so.
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
All right, we're going to do this panel again in a year. I think it was like a watershed moment. So we're going to come back. And I think the insurance really is a missing piece when we're talking about a future of AI agents or a post-agentic world. And all of the risks when we talk about Web3, having this kind of risk transfer addressed and mitigation is not seen as a sexy topic, but I actually think we made one big attempt to make it like a central topic that we cannot avoid. So thank you so much, my panelists, and thank you to Doug.